Hello, 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 and welcome to Hello, 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 and welcome to Hello, 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 and welcome to another round of Pop Cartoon Kabbalah coming at you from the Elau Valley, trying to put together some things. I feel like I understand 7 and 8, but not 9. And every narrative I've seen lately, I'm sure there's a million I haven't seen lately, but every narrative that I've seen lately about 9 really does relate to it in the context of 8 and 10, which not every 7 narrative does. 7 can be more about 3 and 4. But 9, let's say, where 9 appears in the real world is in the degrees, where the 90-degree turn really is the place where you are suddenly facing a different direction more completely. And I know that's absurd to think that one direction could be more complete than another, but 90-degree turns really are how they build all the streets, right? Really what we think of as turning to one side and getting any clarity at all is that. And this is also the measure of the slope of the bow, which is not true. It's 180 degrees, right? But the bow is quite a development as far as development goes. I think sometimes about where bows appear in nature, over the slope of the sky. And I think about when and how a bow emerges in hunting, because hunting goes back a long time. Let's say archaic proto-myths and speculated divinities are mostly hunters, right? Orion, who they say is Og, Enkidu. There's one weapon that Esav, the son of Isaac, uses traditionally, that the word becomes a big one in astrological tradition as the entire axis of things, the tele, which is a bola, not Ebola, but like a bola that you sort of spin around and throw in order to capture things. The main praise of Esav is how good of a hunter he is. Tzayad bepiv. Piv is his mouth, but it's also his hands a little bit. Everywhere you feel from, everywhere you extend and express from. And a lot of the dynamic of conflict is, I think, related to hunting distances. Let's say where Scorpio, as a mythic iconographical figure, right? What does the eagle and the scorpion have in common? They just come out of nowhere from above, from a place of predatory condescension, let's say, but also clarity, tremendous clarity. Like Robert Anton Wilson connects the eagle face on the chariot to the professors, to smarty pantses who just got perspective, so their faces get very owly. It's also kind of owlish, the sort of like condescending look down, the furrowing of the brow that sort of just reminds us of Sam the eagle, right? Judgmental sort of eagle. Sam the eagle is very aware of the things you should know, And the innovation of the 9th over the 8th is the end of that condescension. That condescension is also Athena, She's also a little vicious and takes sides in the way of Scorpio. We mentioned how Bnei Saschar strings together Tishrei, Cheshvan, Mar Heshvan, and Kislev into one big side, one big quarter of the zodiac pie, of the Israel tribe pie, identified with Rachel herself, and just her kids, 2 of whom are one. And apparently in archaic astrology, I was looking this up on Encyclopedia Britannica from 1911, and I'll put a link here eventually. In ancient Babylonian astrology, the 7th month and the 8th month were the same sign. The scale was just the other side of the scorpion, because it's only an eagle in archaic Roman astrology. But archaic Babylonian astrology, the scorpion just sort of extends in both directions. The gauging of the scales and the strike of the scorpion, which is the kaf chovah. And the thing that reconciles in between them, as we discussed a while back, in the context of the end of of Scorpio, is just getting comfortable with the distance. He learns them out, in the context of the 3 temples, which are implicit, understood prophetically and traditionally to be so deeply inherent in process of 3 as an ultimate resolution, right? Some things are 4 and some things are 5 as far as ultimate resolution. For example, the end of empires and the end of Rome and global control in every way that people don't like, certainly all the responsibility in all the way people do like, this sort of anarchist paradise of good administration, let's say, which the challenge in clarifying depends on judgment. There's conflicting priorities, and they express themselves in fundamentally strategic ways. And so elections are very often in November, early November or late November. And so are the judgments, and so are the taxes. And this is, I'm summarizing a little bit what the Bnei Yissaschar has been saying about the tendency in Scorpio that should lead in to something smoother in Sagittarius. Because the horse nature of Sagittarius is not the main thing that defines Sagittarius. And this is understood because the archaic words for it don't emphasize a horse. Horses aren't all so well distributed sometimes. But the bow. And let's say even the Hercules myth labor, where he's able to overcome the vicious Stygian poison birds. There's a terrifying Stygian poison birds that Hercules, even super tough guy, loves a war, Hercules, can't help but be a little strategic with and make a weapon to keep him from getting hurt while he's still doing this thing. And I want to associate that with 2 infinitely resonant, very popular, and somewhat conceptually problematic holidays that coincide right about now-ish in the context of the Hebrew calendar. Sagittarius is up and down. It's like the Hebrew months don't quite overlap with the solar months. They're close, and there's 12. But the ancient Babylonian system was to let them not overlap a little bit, let one sort of extend a little bit before or after, depending on the year, and then just add a month now and then, usually in the springtime, sometimes in the fall. And we still do that, Adar. But the winter and the slope of the winter and the down come into the winter in Mediterranean places where it's usually not snow, but rain, is still the same problem as winter anywhere else, the cold. The cold, even when it's not wet enough, changes us and touches us and tempers us. And this is the transition from, let's say, Scorpio traditionally, I don't cotton to this Pluto nonsense, whatever. Pluto is Mars. No, he's not. Pluto is Saturn. Whatever. Scorpio is traditionally ruled by Saturn. I'm sorry, Mars. But I think there are traditions where it is Saturn. And I think the co-association of Saturn and Mars, which Saturn does in relation to different planets in different ways, like the co-relationship between Saturn and Mercury, the co-relationship between Saturn and Jupiter, the co-relation between Saturn and Mars is observed by Robert Anton Wilson in the endnotes to the Illuminatus trilogy, framed in terms of Sefirot, arguably the most, not Hebrew letters. In a book that the chapters are already Sefirot, the endnotes are all Hebrew letters, Aleph. And the one I think for Hey was about the sacred Tau and the 5 that are the 7 and include the 7, which is a recurring bugaboo for me in like Jewish mystical Judaism. Let's say like there are 7 native fruits and 2 of them are wheat and barley. So really there's only 5. But there's 5 grains, which are 2 of the 7. This is an agricultural thing, which means it goes back a long time. But I'm not here to talk about the stuff I don't know a little bit, because I don't know what's going to be. And I don't know necessarily how to deal with anything, it's all very little intuitive. But the making of the ark that is the cooling of all of us, our lands and our hearts, into some kind of calm is the transition from Mars to Jupiter, traditionally. Let's say even in medieval astrology, the distance from the sun determines how hot a planet is, and thus how hot a planet is. But then why aren't equally hot planets the same planet? Why isn't Mars Venus? Mars should just be Venus, and Mercury should just be Jupiter, if there's not going to be any difference at all. But the difference is wetness, dampness. According to Eliezer of Worms, and I think this summarizes medieval astrological tradition, which probably goes back a while, because he does associate it with the ancient sort of order of the stars and distance from the earth, and the original menorah in the temple, which is 7 branches and not 8, right? The 8th branch is still a legit branch, and the 9th branch is just a shamash. Shamash literally means sun, right? But it actually literally means helper. And in archaic mythology, let's say of the Kuthians, Nergal, who they associate with Sagittarius, he is the archer. And he is all over the place, like Hercules, like Melkart, like Apollo, back and forth from life and death, and adapting. A centaur is sort of a human, right? It's just a human who, like, from a different place, they're just really good at, like, things. But the bow and arrow, as fundamental, it really is an image we have from the Mongols, right? Turks, they were the ones who brought horses to the West. And in many ways, they're the ones who brought possibly the entire concept of Apollo and the sort of killed and resurrected directedness tradition to the West. And maybe even just the bow and arrow coming in from the East. In ancient Mongolian tradition, which I think you still have in Tibetan religion, an Avar is at once a shaman, an arrowhead, and literally a skywalker. Avar. I read a great book one time that suggested that Pythagorean supermath is openly attributed to the encounter with a Thracian Apollo, who this writer suggests is an ancient Mongolian shaman from the old ways, who's just coming from a contemplative, directed tradition of just deciding and doing, resolving, and just going straight ahead. And this is an amazing power, right? To just be able to go straight ahead. Traditionally in Kabbalah, the tikkun of the month is sleep, in the letter Samach, the Samach part of Linus. And that makes sense because there's longer nights, the longest night even, coming down at the end of it, giving way to the next whole cycle, which is a turnaround. I do want to acknowledge the transition from Mars to Jupiter is to get a little bit further away from the sun, the heat source. And thus, Jupiter, according to Leah's Earthworms, is just a lot calmer of thought than Mars. The closer you are to the sun, the less you can really think. It's hot. Heat actually challenges how much you can just stop and think as opposed to shake and move and wiggle and scream, all the things we do in the heat. And the come down through coolness before it gets too cold to be safe, which is the nature of Saturn and Luna, depending on how close to Earth you are. They're about equidistant and both equally cold and equally dangerous in a lot of ways. Cold is more dangerous than the heat in a lot of ways. I'm exaggerating because heat is as dangerous, if not more so. They both burn. But whichever one you have too much of, whichever one you're more in danger of, whichever one is harder. And that's a little bit what the challenge of, I think, Sagittarius is it's still regulating. And I'm going to try and relate to this idea in the context of the Bnei Yissaschar and his exploration of some of these themes. Bnei Yissaschar, Tzvi Elimelech of Dinov, was a great Hassidic master, studied with the big Hassidic rabbis, and heard their astrological traditions. And he describes an origin to the astrological tradition in Judaism bound up in Kislev, in Sagittarius. It's when they started counting, in a way, because it's when the tribe of Yissaschar themselves, who he identifies with as the counters and readers of the sky, conceived at the Pentecost on Shavuot, at the beginning of Gemini, early in Gemini, as are many things, but born 9 months later. Was talking to a dear friend and teacher about the mystery of 9 because I don't get it. I don't understand this time of year at all. Never have. The holidays at the end, almost in the absence of it. And the thing itself, what is the meditation of sleep? It's sort of the end of meditation in a lot of ways. If you're asleep, you must not be meditating. Or something. But in a lot of ways, it's letting go in order to give birth. And this is the secret of the olive oil being squeezed out of the 8 into the 9th, right? The olive is very associated with the 8. Athena, above the earth, right? Ima bina ila'ah, the original understanding, wisdom itself, very associated with olive oil, right? Certain kind of wisdoms with wine, the loud ones, but those are the 7. And so 7 holidays, a lot of wine, Kiddush, But the 8 is associated with the olive oil, the more sublimer wisdom that you can't even quite say, you just kind of keep, and then it's there, and then you have it when you need it. And then it shines from you, your clarities shining and shining, and are thus being understood by the ones who can but love you. And this is a little bit the arrow of Cupid, right? it just gets its way through. And this is the challenge of enlightenment also, let's say, as opposed to the judgments of Scorpio, which are important as reactions to the judgments of Libra, which are a different kind of important. There is just the silencing of the arrow from the bow that is pulled back and ready to go. And I'm going to say what I mean, but I really like enlightenment and clarity itself, urgency itself. It's raining, which comes down as droplets, as little arrow missions, right? It's Thanksgiving, you guys. Happy Thanksgiving morning. Happy day. Thanks and praise. Happy to be met to Vim, Gam Ken Master Shalom Gamar, my